What's up, everybody? You're watching NASA in Silicon Valley Live for November 8th, 2018, and I am your host, Danielle Carmichael. And if you don't know, NASA in Silicon Valley Live is a conversational show out of NASA's Ames Research Center with all the various scientists, researchers, engineers, and all-around cool folks here at NASA, where we talk about all of the nerdy NASA news that you need to know about. And I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Abby.
Hey. Hey, everybody. I am Abby Tabor. Thanks for joining us again. Welcome back this week. And I want to let everybody know where you can find us. So we are simultaneously live on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. But if you want to participate in the chat, you need to join us on Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/NASA. But if you miss us live, don't worry. We'll be on video on demand after the show, including on NASA TV. And if you prefer the audio version, you can find us on your podcast service of choice. So let's do it. Shall we do it?
Yeah.
All right. So did you know, Danielle, that today is National STEM Day?
Yes, I did. And it's actually one of my favorite days of the year.
You're a fan of STEM, are you not?
I am.
Yeah. Well, for those of you at home who may not know about National STEM Day, it's a day that's meant to inspire kids and people of all ages, really, to explore their love of science and pursue their interests in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. So here at NASA, as you might imagine, we are huge fans of STEM.
That's right. Whether our researchers are sending humans to space, developing new technologies to explore the solar system and beyond, or transforming the way we fly, they have a shared passion for STEM.
Absolutely. So for today's show, in celebration of National STEM Day, we're going to introduce you to some of the amazing Wonder Women of NASA who work here at Ames Research Center. They're all super huge fans of STEM, of course, and they're going to talk to us about what they do at NASA, how they got here, and a whole lot more.
So I'm ready. Let's get this show
ready?
kicked off.
All right, then. Before we bring them in, I want to remind everybody, if you have a question, please leave it in the chat, and we'll try to get to those with each of our groups of researchers. So you want to invite our first guest out?
Yeah, let's get started. So let's go ahead and welcome our first guest, Yasmin, Ali, and Laura. Come on out.
Hey!
You have very tall chairs. It's going to take me a minute.
You're not very tall yourself.
Very tall.
We'll give you a moment.
Okay.
Get yourself settled. All right. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
This is very exciting. So why don't we introduce you to everybody watching? Let's go down the line. If you could tell us your name and just really quickly, what do you do here at NASA?
I'm Laura Arachi, and I'm an atmospheric chemist. So I study the composition of the Earth's atmosphere.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Okay, so my name is Ali Guarneros Luna, and I'm an aerospace and systems engineer, a rocket scientist.
Nice.
I'm Yasaman Shirazi. I'm a mechanical engineer who's turned into a biologist. I'm a scientist in the Space Biosciences Research Division, and currently I'm the mission scientist for rodent research for the Space Biology program.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
A lot of
That
stuff
is
there.
really cool.
Awesome.
So let's get things started. So tell me about yourself. Like, how did you know you wanted to, work on rodents or, work on payloads that fly in space?
Well, it's a bit of a story. I've always had a knack for engineering since I was a little child. I always watched my dad fixing things around the house. I remember at age 8 or 9 or 10, I picked up his soldering iron and tried to fix a radio that we had.
Soldering?
So yeah, he came home with this, horrified look, but at the same time, he was, proud that I was doing that.
Right.
And then I always had the space bug growing up, so I always, woke up in the middle of the night, watched all the shuttle launches and landing.
Okay.
And I grew up in Iran, so at the time there was no space program. There still isn't a space program in Iran. So for a long time, this was not something that I thought I could achieve. I was fortunate enough that I immigrated to the U.S. when I was 16, and slowly I worked through all the challenges, and I'm here today.
Yeah.
Hey, that's pretty cool. So,
Inspiring.
I actually think we have a photo of
Oh, no.
Do
when
we?
you were young. So can we get that brought up? So
Someone's
why this photo?
graduating.
So I do biomechanics. I do orthopedic biomechanics, mainly bone biomechanics. And my grandma, this is a picture of my grandmother at my high school graduation in Connecticut. So I got inspired and I got interested in bone biomechanics because I grew up watching my grandmother having a hard time walking, sitting down, going up the stairs. And then it was always something that we as a family had to keep in mind that, you know, where are we going? Is it close enough to stairs? Where are we going to park and all that?
Yeah.
And then I think when I was 14, there was a summer that my grandmother had a knee replacement surgery.
Okay.
And within days, she was able to walk. And I was with her in the hospital during her physical therapy and all that. And it was just a miracle. You know, to me, it was, you know, for 14 years, I'd watched this person having a hard time walking. And then every time the surgeons and the doctors would come in, I would always study those brochures on the implants and all that, those stuff that people throw away all the time.
Right.
And then I was like, you know, whatever those people did in that room for those 5-6 hours, that's what I want to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, life-changing.
That's pretty
Yeah, so
cool.
I got interested in bone mechanics, and I started as a mechanical engineer. I, you know, did a lot of bioinstrumentation, biomedical engineering, and then when I was picking programs for grad school, I was very specific on what I wanted to do. So I looked for the very specific program that was doing bone mechanics, and then it just happened that it was sponsored by the Human Research Program at NASA Johnson. So I got to do orthopedic mechanics, looking at bone loss, recovery, countermeasures in astronauts, which was best of both worlds. It was a NASA project, but also
Right.
working on orthopedic mechanics.
That is cool.
Pretty cool. So it's almost like that was your destiny.
It was, I guess,
Maybe
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that shows you don't have to know from the very beginning.
You don't have to know.
Where-
It's just all the
where
very
you wanna
simple
go,
clues
right?
that you pick up. It doesn't have to be something big. It's just everything around you that you have to look at and get motivated and inspired by.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool.
It's pretty cool. Well, what about you, Ollie? Like, what did you know you wanted to be an aerospace engineer, or, as you like to say, a rocket scientist?
Yes, that happens when I was like 7 years old.
Wow.
I was very young.
Yeah.
When I was actually, I'm from Mexico, so when I was growing up in Mexico, my mother used to buy encyclopedias.
Okay.
And I hope everyone knows what an encyclopedia is, because obviously times have changed, right?
They were books.
Yes.
And if you don't know, you can go to your local library.
The hard copy of Google search.
That's right. And so they have cool pictures and things. And so when I will come from school, I will read them. And that was like my entertainment, right?
Okay.
And through one of those books, I saw a picture of the space shuttle, and you know how I was going to transport humans into space, right? So I was captivated, and I read about it, and then I read about the description of the person that it was actually building it, which was the aerospace engineer.
Right.
And at that time I was like, I want to do this job. I want to take humans into space, build these cool machines. And so because of that, I went to my family and I said, I want to be an aerospace engineer.
Amazing.
And everybody thought I was kind of, where did I get that name from?
Right,
because I
right,
never
right.
heard of it, right? And
Yeah.
so now until I came to the United States and I was able to actually, get that degree, go to school, and be able to, get my aerospace engineering degree. But otherwise, in Mexico, was like, where did you get that
I see.
degree from, right?
I
So
see, yeah.
it was not known. So yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
really great here. So that's the opposite of what I was everybody asking, right? You knew from age 7. That's amazing.
Yes.
So, but before we move on, we also have a photo,
We
an-
do.
an origin photo. Can we go ahead and get that brought up on screen?
Oh,
yes.
Tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, so these are the 2 last astronauts who flew the last space shuttle.
Oh, wow.
So for me, it was special because, I actually I was working with the astronauts at the time that they were in space with the Spheres program. So I was an engineer with the Spheres program at that time, and so we had a 12-hour mission ops, and then on my break, I went and meet these 2 last astronauts who flew the very last one.
Wow,
and so for me, it was like a culmination, right? Like a milestone. Like, I cannot believe I'm here, but so yes.
Super cool.
That's pretty cool.
Nice. All right. Well, what about Laura? Well, when and how did you know you wanted to be what you are today?
Well, in high school, I had 2 really great chemistry classes, and we got to make stinky things, and we got to catch things on fire, and all sorts of really cool stuff. So that had me hooked pretty much from 10th grade.
Excellent.
So everything since then on is all the fault of my high school chemistry teacher, which is great. And then when I was, so I figured I'd go to college. That was kind of always the thing in our family. Keep increasing your education.
Okay.
So was looking for colleges, found a college. Then after college, wanted to do something with chemistry, but a bachelor's in chemistry isn't really enough to do chemistry research. So I was looking around at the graduate programs, trying to figure out what kind of chemistry I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to do something that would help the planet. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, whether that was going to be cleaning up Superfund sites or what. But it's something to make the world better or cleaner. And I was walking through the physics building at my college one day, and I saw a flyer for an internship program for that summer, and it was like 2 days till the deadline. So I think it was fate, right? Because it turns out, so I'm like, I'll go work for NASA. That'd be fun. I won't get it anyway.
Yeah,
so
but I'll try.
I got selected, and I spent the summer at NASA Goddard. And that was where I learned all about the ozone hole and how there was concern that the space shuttle engine exhaust might also lead to ozone depletion. And I got to work for that guy who did that. Like, it was really cool. And so then at the end of the summer, I said, okay, what do I do next? And he said, well, you got to go to graduate school. And I said, okay, where? And he said, well, I met this woman at a conference, and she's teaching at this school, and you should go there. And so I went there, and then after having had just 10 weeks of studying chemistry of the atmosphere, I was pretty hooked. And I went and spent, 5 years, I guess, getting the degree and then moving on from there.
So it was in your destiny as well.
I think it might have been.
And and speaking of that, we have a photo.
Yes, wait till you see. Wait till you see what I look like that summer.
Oh. Look at those curls.
Isn't that great? Yeah, I always wanted curly hair. My hair was a little too straight for the Farrah Fawcett era that I grew up in.
Okay.
So that was the summer I decided to give it a little chemical help.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So, the summer of your perm and your life-changing NASA internship.
Absolutely.
What a year. No, that's awesome. That is cool. So what does all of this mean for you today, right? Like, what is a day in the life of Laura, the atmospheric chemist? Can you tell us what you do?
Well, I don't catch anything on fire on a good day.
Yeah.
Those are the bad days, actually. But what I do get to do, though, is make measurements from aircraft that tell us about the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. So I work with a team. I lead a team of 5 or 6 of us who calibrate instruments, put them on aircraft, and then analyze the data, and then give the data to folks who collect data by satellite. And then they use our sort of ground truth data to make sure that the satellites are returning the proper information.
Comparing your data closer to home, right, with the satellite data?
Exactly.
I see,
So some of my days are spent counting satellite orbits to figure out when they're going to be over California at the right time of day. And some of my days are spent calibrating instruments and throwing wrenches. I mean, carefully tuning all of everything with wrenches. So the days are all pretty different, actually, but they kind of go on like a 2-week cycle of preparing for a mission and then flying and then analyzing the data.
So I hope some of those days you actually get to fly.
Yeah, do you fly?
I have twice been up to collect data. And I've only thrown up once. The landing back here at Moffett Field is kind of tough, actually, because the airspace is so congested with SFO, the San Francisco International Airport, and then San Jose Airport, and then there's a couple smaller airports. And so when the aircraft that we use for collecting data wants to get to Moffett Field, they have to come in through a really tiny sort of channel, and they make a really hard turn, and they come down really fast. And it kind of messed with me once, but I didn't throw up till the very end.
Okay. Everyone appreciates that.
Yeah, and I made it into the little barf bag.
Okay.
That's very carefully positioned. So,
what's the name of your project or your plane or?
So the project is called AJAX.
Okay.
The Alpha Jet Atmospheric Experiment.
Ooh, it's pretty cool.
And we met actually a couple members of her team. Remember
We
2 weeks
did,
ago on the Halloween episode?
You did.
Caroline and Emma came in their full flight suits that they have to wear at altitudes like that. It was pretty awesome.
pretty
It was
cool.
fun. It's a fun project.
Very cool.
So
Did you have a photo you wanted to share of that?
There is one of us out on the flight line, but whatever makes. Yeah. So so you can see the plane in the back there, and so this is 3 of us from the team deciding the last minute changes. You can see the blue instrument cart there under the wing, and you can see the little GPS on the top of the cone there. So we're getting everything ready and synchronized. We need to synchronize all the instruments and get them all warmed up before flight. And I'm guessing that at the point this picture was taken, I was probably cursing the weather, because if you look at the sky, you'll see that the satellites were not going to see very much that day.
It's cloudy, yeah.
So I'm guessing I was probably trying to decide if we need to go to a different location, right? Instead of going offshore, maybe we would be changing the plan to go into the Central Valley if it was clear there.
Do you always fly around California?
Yeah, California and Nevada. We've got about a 2-hour duration.
okay.
Yeah, cool.
Pretty cool.
Interesting. All right, we better move on and learn about our other guests. So what's a day in the life of Ali?
It's very much like hers. You know, like I do different things. It's not always the same.
Very.
Yes, very different. It varies from day to day. It's never the same thing. And we build satellites, so small CubeSats.
Wait.
You have
Speaking of small sets, I actually have
Aha. You brought one.
one for you.
Thank you. So
Get one?
yes,
Everyone
you can
goes
have
home
one.
with a CubeSat.
So they're very tiny, as you can see, right? This one is a 1.5 U. That's what we call them. It's 10. They go by 10 centimeters, so 10 centimeters, something like this. So it will be 1 U,
1.5.
but this one is 15 centimeters, so
Yeah.
it's 1.5.
And this is a satellite.
This is a satellite. Actually,
Okay,
this
it's
is
just a miniature.
no. Actually, this is the size.
Yeah.
Of the
Oh, yeah,
satellite.
that's what I meant. It's just a tiny satellite.
Yeah, so it's a tiny satellite, and almost like a toy, right? So as you can imagine, it's almost like a watch that you have to build. That it takes a lot of precision and tries, and we start with the different instrumentations, and then we build up, right? And as you can see, this one right here is called the nodes, and we built it and flew it from deployed it from the space station in 2016, and this is just one size. The one that I just finished, it was a 6U, but it was a long 6U.
Okay.
And it was 60. Well, actually, it was 74 centimeters, so it's more than 6U. And it had a lot of instrumentation. We have
Like what?
NOAA radio. We had a NOAA radio that is going to talk to the east and ghost satellites.
To the weather satellites.
That's right.
Oh, okay. New ones are great.
Yes, and so NOAA tries to develop these radios, so they ask us to fly it, so we're flying it for them. And then we have a lunar radio, which is the first of its kind. Is if it works, we can actually talk from Earth to the moon distance with no relay.
Oh,
so which is something that a lot of people are interested, because since we're going to the moon, we want to build that infrastructure. And then we also have Wi-Fi. So if you think of Wi-Fi, we can
Never
actually
leave home without it.
I know.
in space,
We
too.
actually have it in our satellite, and we can communicate from the satellite to the ground and get video or data, right? We actually have a radio that you can use. So, and then we also have wireless sensors. So they're like little tiny wireless sensors, and I think she has them right there. And I'm going to show you.
These
Yes.
for you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is how we started. I just wanted to show it to you guys. This is how we started the first wireless sensor, and this is what we ended up building a van. So these tiny ones are the ones that we put in our satellites, right? And so we can put them anywhere inside the satellite, and it will communicate to a coordinator.
Oh, okay.
And it will be able to give us data, whatever sensor we have in here. So we can have a temperature, pressure, materials. We also have some of the satellites that I work. We have TPS material at the bottom, so we can actually, if we want to, we can embed some instrumentation into the material, and then learn how, when it's burning, coming to reentry, it burns, right?
Okay.
And something that we
Some
can
protection down there to
Yeah.
protect the instruments from burning up.
No. We want to know how fast it's burning.
Oh, how fast
So
it's
we
burning.
can characterize the material, right? And
all
so
right.
that's what we use. And then this one right here, I brought it because this is actually the radio that we use for the satellite. So we can actually communicate with the satellite via our computers, email, and we can also use our phones. So we can actually send command or receive commands from the satellite.
Oh, that's crazy.
Through these, from the phone. So And that's just one. There's other stuff that I have. We have a
Oh, we're gonna have
VR virtual reality
VR.
on the satellite. So
man.
as it gets deployed, we can actually see.
Oh, cool.
We're filming the space station, and then we're getting the data, and it's actually compressing it on board. And then when we get it here, we actually put it together. And so we giving the NVIDIA, something interesting. So that's that's what. So, but anyway,
So, a day in the life, you're building satellites.
building satellites, yeah, and developing technology.
That's
yes.
pretty amazing.
Well, looks like Laura and Ali are pretty exciting. What about you guys, Mom?
What you got?
What's the day in the life?
She's also excited.
I'm super excited too. So again, as everyone else mentioned, it really depends what you're working on and what phase of the mission you're in. So I wear two hats. One that I don't wear very often these days is my research hat. My second hat that I wear all the time almost these days is my mission scientist hat. So the International Space Station, ISS, was built as a laboratory. It took us over a decade to build it, but now it's at its full capacity and we're using it as a laboratory off the Earth so that we can use the results that we get for the people who are on Earth. So I work with one of the few model organisms that are on the station. I work with rodents. And then so we use rodents as like a translational model because we can collect more data and then we can do a very detailed study and then collect information that we couldn't collect on people. But then we use those results to come up to study diseases or come up with cures or countermeasures for people. And then so basically my job is working with the scientists at either NASA or universities, commercial entities, industrial companies to take their science from the lab bench to their International Space Station. Now, as you can imagine, that involves working with the scientists and then translating what they have for their science requirements for engineers, for operations specialists, train the crew members to do the science. I mean, a lot of the crew members don't have a science background, but the overachiever people they are, they'll learn everything. So it's impressive how, an Air Force pilot or test pilot can work with rodents or plants or cells that they've never done before. So once we do all that, then we're ready for flight. So we go down to Kennedy Space Center to launch our payload on SpaceX Dragon, and then we just wait for it, hoping it launches. If it doesn't launch, then we go back to the drawing board, do everything all over again, and then the minute it launches, you want to take a deep breath because you're so relieved. But then you have to remind yourself that this is just the beginning because now you have to do the whole mission on orbit
like now you
and
actually
monitor
have to
it
go to work.
24/7. Well, not only you have to go to work, but now you have to go to work on GMT time because the station runs on GMT time.
That's right.
So a lot of times we come to work at 11 p.m. California time or 12 p.m. California time so that we can work with the crew when they wake up.
So I have a couple of things for you. So, like, what's this? Like, can you explain to our audience?
These are 3D printed bone models. These have been gained by computer tomography, so CT or like a clinical CT. Yeah. So the micro CT that we use is just like the clinical CT that everyone uses, but at a very smaller scale with a higher resolution.
Okay.
One of the things that happens to humans as well as rodents in microgravity is bone loss. So being in microgravity is similar to accelerated aging. And so now we're working with different groups to build an exercise machine to come up with countermeasures for our astronauts, and then we use rodent models to study this because rodents have a much shorter lifespan. Their lifespan is about 2 years. And then the changes that happen in their musculoskeletal physiology is very similar to the changes that happens in humans. So we use rodents, we send them to the ISS in microgravity so that the changes that happens in their, let's say, muscles or bones in a matter of 30 or 60 days is equivalent to a couple of months or a couple of years in people.
Yeah.
And then so we have to
ask.
Yes.
Does that mean you've got a little tiny mouse treadmill? Because the picture in my head right now is adorable.
There are mass treadmills here on the ground. We haven't flown one to ISS yet. Yeah, but I have worked with treadmills or other exercise models. Actually, that's one of my expertise during my graduate work, and then here my postdoctoral work at NASA. I've worked on countermeasures focusing on exercise, so treadmill running, resistance training, aerobic versus resistance. So that's a lot of what I've been working on, along with nutrition and pharmaceuticals. But exercise is something that has proven to be beneficial for both rodents and humans. So ARED, the Advanced Resistance Exercise Device, is on orbit now. So all the crew have to work out about 2 to 3 hours a day.
Yeah, that's so much. Yeah, you can see photos
Talk
of
about
them.
dedication.
Video. Yeah.
So I think we have, before we move on real quickly, we have an origin photo, or not an origin photo, a day in the life photo.
Day in life photo.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can we get that brought up?
So this is the micro CT machine that I mentioned. So what you see there is a femur, but this is basically where these scans are made, and we create 3D models of the bones to quantify the changes that have happened. So we've got two types of bones. We've got the cortical bone, which is like the long tube-like bone, and we have cancellous or spongy bone, which is what I showed you.
Okay.
And then all those little struts are called trabeculi. So we look at their structure, their integrity, and whether they're broken or whether they're intact, and how they change with spaceflight or exercise or diet or nutrition.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, shall we go on to our
think we
first
should.
segment? Because we have so much to talk about and games to play, okay? So we're going to head into our Let's Play segment, okay? This may include game controllers, 12-sided dice, or Pop-Matic bubbles. It's all an excuse to play games and talk about science. So let's get into that. All right, so let me tell you what's going to happen here. We're calling this our Women at NASA quiz, and here's how it's going to work. We'll put up an image on the monitor of an amazing NASA woman, and we're going to give you clues about who that person might be. You try to identify them by name, and if anybody playing at home wants to get in on it, write your answer in the chat, and we'll see who finds it first. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, ready?
So let's bring up our first Wonder Woman. So, for your first clue, prior to NASA, her research engineering career resulted in 3 patents.
Elena Shaw.
What? What is that? Like, I'd know that jacket anywhere.
Yes, the position, yeah.
Tell us again, what's her name?
Elena Shaw.
Ellen Ochoa.
That's
yes.
pretty cool. So, other fun facts for you guys watching. She was the first Hispanic woman to go to space, and she recently just retired. But before that, she served as director of NASA's Johnson Space Center, and she was the second woman to do so.
That's pretty impressive. That's
It's a big center, yeah.
It is.
not too shabby for a career path, Ellen Ochoa. Cool. All right, let's go on to our second NASA woman. Get that up there. I will read you the first clue while we wait for her image. There she is.
I know exactly who that
Of course.
Man, can I at least read the first clue?
is. Yes.
Okay.
I'll wait.
She was NASA's first female non-military chief of the astronaut office. Not too bad. She is. I'm going to give these two a chance if you don't mind.
I'm biased because I worked with her for 3 missions.
Oh, cool. All right. She is NASA's most experienced astronaut, holding the American record for the most time spent in space, surpassing Jeffrey Williams and Scott Kelly in 2017 with 665 days.
Yeah.
And she also holds the record for total spacewalks by a woman at 10 and the longest single space flight by a woman. So
Amazing.
she clearly is amazing. Yasmin, why don't you tell us?
That's Dr. Peggy Whitson.
Yes! And you got to work with her. That's so cool.
Yeah, we worked with her for 3 rodent research missions, and she's amazing. Very motivated, very committed. So yeah,
Awesome.
Very much enjoyed it.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. All
So
right.
we're going to move on to our third Wonder Woman, and I'm hoping that I can at least get through the first couple clues.
I know, right?
So, she is known for her work analyzing data from wind tunnel experiments and real-world aircraft flight experiments. She was NASA's first African-American female engineer.
Yes, I know.
Dorothy.
Not, but in the same group. And so along with Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Vaughan, she made it part of NASA's Langley's Research Center Human Computer Group.
The human computers, yes. That's familiar.
So if it's not Katherine Johnson and it's not Dorothy Vaughan.
Mary Jackson.
Yeah!
Nice. Yasmin 2.
Do I get a prize at the end?
You do, which I will.
Satisfaction of knowing your
Yes.
history.
Awesome. All right, number 4. We ready? She helped launch NASA's first successful astronomical mission, the Orbiting Solar Observatory 1. She was the first chief of astronomy in the Office of Space Science and the first woman to hold an executive position at NASA. That's cool. And I love this. She is called the Mother of Hubble through her oversight for planning and development of the Hubble Space Telescope.
Wow.
Cool.
Did you know Hubble had a mother?
Oh.
Does anybody know her name?
No, I don't.
Then let us introduce you to Nancy Roman. So cool. Honestly, I didn't know her work either, and so I'm glad to find out. Learn more about her later.
Okay, and we are going to move on to our Wonder Woman number 5. She lived underwater in an undersea habitat for 9 days as a member of NASA's mission preparing astronauts for future exploration. She's second on the list in cumulative spacewalk time by a female astronaut behind Peggy.
Is that Suni?
Yes, it is.
Suni Williams.
Yes. Wow. And another cool fun fact is that she was actually selected to fly aboard Boeing's commercial crew spacecraft.
Didn't she also run a marathon?
Oh, yeah, she
did.
did.
Yeah,
She did.
She ran the Boston Marathon on the ISS treadmill a couple years ago. Yeah.
And she also completed a triathlon on
Right.
the ISS. Other fun facts I
involve
learned.
swimming?
Swim on the ISS.
So she
maybe
had
just
to do weight-bearing exercises that mimic the
Swimming?
strokes of
That's
swimming.
so funny.
So where there's a will, there's a way.
Wow, swim in space. Okay, so our clear winner was Yasmin. Oh, yes. Well done.
Well played.
You get a prize that we'll figure out later. All right, so seriously, we gotta move on because there's so much good information, and we're gonna move into our Q&A. So our viewers have some questions for you. If you have a question now that you want to add, throw it in the chat, and we'll see how many we can get to before they have to go. So the first thing that Danielle and I wanted to know, right, was can you name a particularly memorable moment from your career? Do you have like a really favorite moment, a shining example, or just a memorable one?
I've got a memorable one, but it's probably not my favorite.
Oh, really?
It involved a couple of fire trucks and some hazmat gear.
Oh, no.
It was late one night in graduate school, and we finally decided we should call my advisor and let her know that the fire trucks were coming.
Oh, no.
It turned out okay in the end, but we had to evacuate the lab for a little while.
Oh, shoot.
And
What did you do, Laura?
I didn't do anything, but the vacuum doer broke and wound up releasing sulfur trioxide into the air, which is a really bad thing because it mixes with the water in your lungs and makes sulfuric acid in your lungs. So, fortunately, I had the good sense to run screaming from the building after pulling the fire alarm. And all of I think the first year graduate students had been having a lecture down at the other end of the building because they were all just kind of standing around outside the door because somebody had pulled the fire alarm. They're just standing around. And I come screaming out of the building, lab coat, glasses. "It's for real," she said, running out of the building. And they all looked at me and started running.
That's memorable. Wow. All right. Adventures in science. Oh, yeah. What about you?
Gosh, every time I do one of these things, you know, there is something memorable about it. I can tell you the last one, not as tragic as yours. Yes. We were setting up Techasat 8, which is the last one I put in, you know, we built and deliver, and we were going to do thermovac. So basically we put it in the oven, we take all the air, and then we raise it to certain temperature and lower the temperature. So, we put it in there with all the sensors, and then we had two people, mandating the whole, because you have to wash the whole experiment for the 2 days, right?
Okay.
And so the guys are looking at the temperature, and it's not changing. It went up to certain, like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it was going to come down, and it's not changing after 2 hours. And so they ended up calling somebody, and it turns out that the oven actually had malfunction. So we had to, we wasted the whole weekend, and we needed to do this before, for delivering the satellite. So we were trying to scramble in where can we take the satellite, to do this testing, whether it was going to be Johnson Space Center or another facility here around. So luckily the people in the EEL, which is a facility here, were able to fix the problem and continue the experiment next, a week later. But, it was kind of stressful because we needed to deliver the satellite in 2 weeks. So we're like,
Stress.
Yes. So that was the last one. But
A recent memorable.
yes, every single one, we have one, yeah.
Cool.
So what about you, Yasaman? Like, I'm sure dealing with rodents can be very memorable.
I mean, space flight in general is always memorable. I mean, not every single launch is different. There's always, firsts. Working with crew is always, a unique experience. For me, though, the most rewarding part of my job is when I can inspire someone else. So I used to teach for a brief amount of time, and then, here, we always have interns. We have students that come through the lab, and we work with them. So for me, like, if I see that light bulb go on in, like 1 out of 100 kids, that's just the most rewarding part for me. And, we've had students coming through our lab who did not really know what they wanted to do, but now, they're in medical school or grad school getting their PhDs. And for me, at the end of the day, it just makes it all the work worth it.
Isn't that it's amazing.
You changed a life right there, right? So cool.
So, well, ladies, we would love to spend the rest of our episode with you, but unfortunately we can't because we have another group of Wonder Women here at NASA.
Right.
So, unfortunately, we are going to have to say bye to you guys. Sorry.
Thank you for coming. Such awesome stories.
Should we send them in for you?
Well, we'll be calling them right in a moment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So just as a reminder for everybody watching at home, this is NASA in Silicon Valley Live, and today we're celebrating National STEM Day by talking with some amazing Wonder Women of NASA. So if you have a question for our guests, write it in the chat, and we'll try to get to more of them. We just have so much amazing information to cover that we sometimes run out of time. But
that's a good thing, though.
it's a good problem to have, absolutely. Do you want to introduce our second group?
Yeah, so come on out, Diana, Jessica, and Kathy.
Hey!
Welcome. Haley.
Welcome. Oh, this is the Black Crew. Did you guys plan that?
I missed the dress code memo today.
Looks great. Welcome. Welcome. Oh.
Looks like you guys are having a lot of fun.
We were. So let's do it again. Let's, like we did last time, just introduce yourselves and tell us a couple sentences about what you do at NASA.
Catherine Bywaters. I'm an astrobiologist, and I work on life detection instrumentation.
We'll learn
Interesting.
more about astrobiology later. Awesome.
I'm Jessica Marquez, and I work in the Human Systems Integration Division, and I build software for mission control.
Ooh.
I'm Diana Gentry. I am a bioengineer, which means I get to wear many hats at the intersection of science and math and technology. But I primarily look at ways of better measuring how microbes interact with their environments.
Oh,
Okay, that's
interesting.
It's very interesting. That's a lot to unpack. But before we do, like, when did you know that you wanted to be anything involved in space? Like, how did you know? What was your aha moment?
Well, it happened in stages. I think the very first thing that set me on that path, I was about 4 years old, and my dad was watching TV. He said, oh, come here, sit down. This is very important. And it was the original Star Trek. And so I watched the whole series with him. And at that point, I was bitten by the space bug. And I thought, clearly I need to be a scientist. And as I got a little older and in middle school and high school, I started to realize that I also really enjoyed math. And I also kind of enjoyed building things with my hands. And I thought, but science is really the most important thing. And eventually I got to college, and I was listening to a presentation about the various majors that they offered and so on and so forth. And I was talking with a classmate afterwards. He said, "What are you interested in?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm probably going to do biology, although I kind of wish I could also do math and maybe some engineering." And he said, "Well, you know, there's this bioengineering program. It's a little weird and I don't know much about it." And it was this, I can have my cake and eat it too.
Right.
I didn't realize I didn't have to choose. Yeah. And so from then on, I knew that was the direction I was going in.
That's
Okay,
awesome
so
to have that
speaking
moment.
of bioengineering, I think we have a really cool and very interesting photo of you. So,
Right.
what is going on
Oh, I
here?
understand. No, I don't. What is going on?
So at my university, there's a tradition that when you go to graduate, you go in costume. And as I said, when I was studying math, I felt like I wasn't getting quite enough building things with my hands going on, and I might have gone a little bit overboard with this event. And so I decided I was going to build a working shower stall that's strapped onto my back with plumbing and a water tank so I could spray water at people. And so I've got the curtain on, and you can see the faucet coming over there and the shower cap on my mortarboard. It was a great day. Yeah, and it didn't hurt that it was about 95 degrees that day. And
Okay, so people
yeah,
didn't
I
hold
was
it
glad of
against
the
you.
water.
Can you tell us really quickly before we move on? You told me a story about how you chose between math and engineering.
Oh, yes. This was probably one of the best pieces of mentorship advice I ever got. I was taking a kind of introductory engineering class. At the time, I thought I was probably going to be an applied math major. But the previous quarter, I had seen all of these people who were getting to do things like build little robots out of balsa wood and rubber bands that played frisbee and things like that. I thought, I want to do that. So I was taking this class, and the woman teaching it called me over about halfway through and said, "You're doing very well in this class. I just wanted to know, are you planning to major in engineering?" And I said, "Well, no, I think I'm going to be doing math." And she said, "Look, there are two kinds of people in this world. There are answer finders and there are problem solvers. The answer finder says, 'Is this right?' And the problem solver says, 'Does this work?' And you are clearly a problem solver. You are going to be bored stiff in applied mathematics. Take some engineering where you actually get to build stuff and see the lights come on and the motors turn and so on and so forth. And if you really want the more mathematical rigor, you can do that in grad school." And that was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. It was absolutely true.
Right, that simple comment made you realize, oh, I'm that kind of person. I
Yeah.
gotta do engineering. Awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, cool.
What about you, Jessica?
So I have always been interested in science and love learning and math, and ever since I was a little kid. And I remember my dad taking me to see the Halley's Comet when it was passing, and so I would always had this interest in science. But it wasn't until I got to undergraduate and I was studying engineering at that point that I really understood how I can contribute to NASA and how I can contribute to the space program. So it was actually through an internship here at NASA Ames, and I learned about how NASA works, what kind of careers are involved in engineering, or the different aspects that I could work on in order to contribute to human spaceflight. And then that led me to apply to grad school, and that's where I really started focusing on the intersection of humans and engineering. So understanding how we can develop and create tools that support people in a very complex aerospace system. So my focus is always, how do I make this tool better for people?
Okay.
And that's how that's what I do now here in NASA Ames.
Well, let's bring up Jessica's origin photo, because this is also a cool one.
Yeah, so this is a picture of me back in 1998. I did my internship, and this cohort of class, we had a research project. We got to visit different NASA centers. This is a picture of us visiting the Space Shuttle Atlantis when it was being refurbished. And it just got me really excited about working with people in human spaceflight. And there's several people in there that also already now still work at NASA, so it was a pretty great set of teams.
And like not only at NASA, but didn't you mention that a lot of them are here at Ames as well?
Yeah, so it was just like
funny.
our whole little cohort was really tight-knit, and we all got the space bug, and yeah, some of us work here, some of us work at Johnson Space Center. Yeah, and then our mentor for that program also helped me get my job. So it was quite a life-changing internship.
Yeah, so internships are a great way to get started. Yeah, I agree. Awesome. How about you, Kathy?
Well, I had two aha moments, I think. First one was that when I knew I wanted to be a biologist. So my background, my educational background's a little unconventional. I completed 6th grade, and then my father moved my sister and I overseas, so that was pretty much the end of my education.
Wow, really?
Yeah, until I moved back to the States and I started at a community college. And I took a biology class because I had no idea what it was really about. And I remember just sitting and learning about the inner workings of a cell, and it's like a whole nother world, a whole universe inside of us that I had no idea even existed. So that's when I was fascinated with biology, and I was sold, had to do biology. And then for when I decided I really wanted to be an astrobiologist was I went to Utah with a group of people to a Mars analog. And what an analog is it's an environment that replicates some aspect of something else. So here it's, you know, it looks a lot like Mars, so that's nice for the psyche, but it also is very dry, and it has some of the same sorts of habitats that you might find on Mars. So going there and investigating that and really learning about extremophiles, so microbes that live under these extreme conditions, it's like, wow, someone's going to pay me to play in the dirt? Doesn't get any better than this. So that was my aha moment.
That's nice. You brought a photo of that,
I
didn't
did.
There's the Utah. But
So see, in the background looks a lot of Mars-like, and this is a group of us just hanging out, and the experts in the field were explaining the different environments and, you know, the different habitats and way the microbes were making a living. And I was just fascinated.
Yeah. So this is it.
This is it.
So then I know a little bit about what you went on to do because I'm lucky enough to have experienced some of Kathy's day in the life when I went to cover this NASA research project doing their field campaign, field work. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what is a day in the life?
A day in the life. So I do lab work as well as field work. And my lab work consists of testing different instrumentation that would go for looking for life on different planetary bodies. So Mars, Europa, Enceladus. And it's really thinking about the questions of, you know, how would we look for life? What would we look for? And what if it doesn't look like us? What sort of signatures can we pick up on? So it's testing instrumentation, and then when not testing, and I think we actually have.
Yes. Yeah, I forgot that you brought this interesting little object.
So everything for space flight needs to be lightweight and small. So actually, if you flip it around,
Yeah.
and we can open
Oh, we can
this.
take it out.
We can take it out. So if you see, there are two little wells there. The sample goes in one side and comes out the other. If you apply a current through it, the sample will move through a tiny little fluidic channel and then through a tiny little nanopore. As the biomolecules of interest go through the tiny pore, it disrupts the current, and then we can learn about what it is. So we can investigate DNA, RNA, proteins, viruses, all with something this small.
So you're literally doing science that's small enough to fit in your pocket.
Yes.
Yes, look at that. And in some
then-
fascinating places.
And then I get to go and test things like this out in the field. And that's where I got to hang out with you.
Yeah, that's right. In the Atacama Desert, as it happens, which is so dry, it's a lot like Mars.
So where is the Atacama Desert?
So that is in Chile.
Okay.
And it is one of the driest locations on Earth, and its rival would be the Antarctic dry valleys.
Okay.
And we go there because it's so dry, it's a good analog for Mars again. And planetary bodies that are, you know, might be considered dead, but might have remnants of life, or life making a living in very special environments. So we go there, and, you know, when you look out, it's very barren, there's no life, you don't see little bushes or plants anywhere. And so we have to be really careful not to contaminate the environment. We get all suited up.
Okay.
Let's take a look at Kathy's Everybody's photo in the desert.
So
You get
right, so there I am. We dug this hole, and then you have to wear the clean room suit, whole gown, and booties and hat, and be very careful to take your sample because any of your own microbes or your own DNA that gets contaminated in there will overwhelm the background. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah,
and
that is you in the hole, right?
That is me. That's me in the hole.
I can't even tell. Fascinating.
So I think I'm very lucky, and I love what I do.
I mean, you get paid to play in the dirt.
Exactly.
So I feel like that's any kid's dream.
So exciting. Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Jessica?
So my main goal at here is to develop software. So the main focus that we do is building, planning, and scheduling tools. And so I get to actually learn about everybody else's job in order to create these software tools. So, and then I get to test field them in different places. So I get to learn about how trainers might be teaching astronauts how to do their job. I get to go to mission control and learn how they control robots, how they manage the International Space Station, how they schedule astronauts' time. And we take all that information in order to build and design our tools. And then we get to test them in different environments. So we've gotten to test them everywhere from underwater in the extreme environments of analogs. We also work in analogs, but these analogs don't necessarily have to simulate a planetary environment. It is simulating some aspect of mission control.
Okay.
So they have a slightly different, or they're trying to push some aspect of human spaceflight, maybe isolation. So we give them our tools and we get feedback. And so I've gotten to go to places like volcanoes and the mission under the water, underwater, the Arctic, mission control at Johnson Space Center. So our tool has been up in space station, so that was also very exciting.
Super cool.
It's pretty cool.
So mission control is like the brain of the space missions, right? Where they're controlling how would you describe it?
Yeah, so mission control. So we have astronauts up in space station, and they're super busy, and the whole entire space station is managed by a huge team of flight controllers back on ground.
Okay.
And so they're located physically in Johnson Space Center, but there's also different smaller mission controls in Europe, in Japan, and we have another one in Alabama. We also actually have one here at NASA Ames, and they all coordinate to make sure that the space station is healthy, that all the science payloads are working, and that we're keeping the the astronauts working. If they have any questions, we keep them healthy. So.
Cool. Did you bring a photo?
I think she did.
Yes.
And this one has a really cool background story.
Yes, so this is a picture of me at NASA Johnson Space Center in mission control. So this is when we did our first deployment of our tool up in space station. So I got to sit down in mission control and got to talk on the loops, which is just the way they talk, the communication loops that they have. And yeah, it was very exciting. We got to talk to the astronauts and work with them that whole week that we were there.
So your voice is forever like down in the NASA records.
Yeah, so I was actually very hesitant to talk during the mission, and one of my colleagues was sitting in the front room. So there's actually multiple. Not only are there thousands of people, there are multiple rooms. So I was sitting in one of the back rooms, and someone in the front room calls over and is like, "Can you please give me a status on Playbook?" That's our tool. And so he forced me to actually talk on the loops so that my voice was forever recorded.
Were you at all tempted to say, Houston, we have a problem?
No, I actually was very hesitant about talking because it is, they are listening to so many conversations that I didn't want to like add to that problem or add to that workload. So I was actually very much like, I'm going to just be here. Unless I have to talk, I'm only going to talk. And then he called me out and he was like, it's okay.
Your opportunity.
It's okay.
All right, let's keep going.
So what about you, Diana? Like, what is the day in the life?
It's very seasonal.
Oh.
So in the wintertime, most of what I'm doing is benchtop work. So we build these devices that you can grow microbes in, and we can control the environments on a very small scale and with a bunch of sensors attached. And so we can expose them to different types of environmental stresses, and we can see how they respond to that. In the summer, we are frequently out in Mars analog environments, like the type that Kathy was talking about. In particular, we tend to visit recent eruption sites in Iceland. One of the things that I work on is instrumentation for life detection. And one of the things that's very important with life detection is that you have to know what your null case is, what your baseline is. And that's actually extremely difficult to do on Earth because life is everywhere and very hard to kill. So we go to recent eruption sites that have basically cooled down just enough that you can walk on them and go out there with your instrument. And we try and figure out what it will actually read when there shouldn't be any life there.
Yeah, okay. Like to set your instrument at 0, kind of, right?
Yes. And then in the spring and the fall, which is fog season around here in the Bay Area, I work on a project that develops payloads for drones, for UAVs, and that captures fog and cloud water for biochemical analysis so that we can see what's up there in the fog and if it's alive and if it's doing anything.
So why fog?
Right.
Like, I know it's very prevalent around here, but
Yeah, that it is.
Like, why exactly? Like, what's so special about fog?
So the core question that we're trying to get at is life possible on an extended basis in the absence of stable surface water? And on Earth, this isn't an issue because all of the fog that we have cycles fairly rapidly through having been puddles or lakes or rivers or the ocean, and then it comes up into the atmosphere, and then it comes back down again. But if you look at a planet like, say, Venus, where the surface is way too hot for there to be any stable liquid there, but you have kilometers and kilometers of much cooler, dense clouds above the surface, is that an area that we should consider a possible habitat?
Interesting.
It's pretty amazing.
That's actually really cool.
We have a photo of you on one of the volcano trips, right?
We do.
Is that? Yeah.
Yes,
tell us
and
about that.
so this trip actually melded a little bit of the two. So I'm standing in front of a hydrothermal vent. So there's basically a hot spot under the ground that is hot enough that it's forcing boiling hot water up to the surface. And so we've got a combination of boiling hot water coming up off of the ground, and then it's mixing with the very cool air and causing a ton of steam to condense.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so that interface is very interesting in terms of what's alive, what survives, how far does it get carried, and what kinds of chemistry is in there that could possibly be the foundation for stuff to eat.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Actually really cool.
Cool stuff, you guys. All right, so folks, we have to make a decision, I think. We're going to run out of time. So, do you want to talk about the weirdest moment in your science or the most memorable favorite moment and answer some questions? Danielle, do you have a preference?
I have a preference.
You do?
I'd say weird science because you guys get to do some really cool things, experience some really cool things, and also happen to be documented while you're doing these really cool things.
That's true. Why don't we roll into weird science? If you want to tell us something else, you can do that. you want to read
No,
this?
Weird Science was the one I
It was.
wanted.
Yes. All right.
I wanted to take questions. I like to live dangerously.
So, Weird Science, this is the part of the show where we want to hear from our guests about the craziest things that they've done in the name of science. Okay, so Kathy, you're up first. Let's go ahead and bring up her photo of Weird Science.
And then, yeah. Oh, wow.
So I think my weird science, one of the weirdest things I've done for science, would be to spend 4 months on a deserted island in the Canadian high Arctic.
Wow.
With the 6 other people, and it turned out great. We had a great crew. You know, we still talk to each other, so that should be a good
That
sign.
says something.
But it was looking at the transition between the winter to spring thaw in the active layer above the permafrost, and we were doing it in simulation. So we had the isolation effect. We were on Mars time, so you've got a few extra minutes in the day, and being in the Arctic, it's light all the time. So we could create our own light-dark cycles. So we took advantage of that. and I got to go out and take some great samples. And that was two of us out in the field returning home after a long day. And I'd say
That had to have been like probably one of the coolest things that you've done.
I would think so.
It definitely is one of the more unique things that I've done.
That photo's amazing.
Thank you. So that's my
story.
weird science.
All right. Nice.
So what about you, Jessica? Like, you said that you get the opportunity to be a day in the life of these other people when you're trying to help them build platforms.
Yes.
Like, what's your weird science?
So my weird science is not that, but it was the opportunity. So one of the things that you learn in grad school is that you, especially if you're doing research with humans, you always volunteer for your classmates' experiments. So I have always volunteered for everybody's experiment. Everybody volunteers for my experiments. So when I was here at Ames, I volunteered to be on the Vomit Comet.
And what is that?
So that's an airplane that does parabolic flight. So it goes up and then comes down. And so depending on its trajectory, you get different amounts of gravity. And so in this particular flight, we were doing lunar gravity. So I have experienced lunar gravity, and that was really cool. And the purpose of the experiment was to understand how blood flows in partial gravity. So I was all instrumented up with a whole bunch of electrodes, and they took a echogram of my heart, and while I was in on the parabolic flight. And so
I think we have a photo of you all strapped up
in lunar gravity.
So you could see all the electrodes, and it was actually really cool. It made me think about all sorts of interesting challenges in terms of like how would we build things in partial gravity, because there's still enough weight to you, but not a lot, and so it has like this very interesting mixture, because the microgravity, we know how to design things for microgravity. It's well, sort of, we know what to expect in some ways.
That's like on the space station, right?
Yeah, in the space station. But lunar is like we spend so little time on it, so there's a whole slew of design problems there.
That's fascinating.
Very cool.
Very cool. All right. Well, Diana, are you up for sharing a weird science moment?
Well, I can't top Kathy's story here. But in our Iceland trips, because one of the things that we're looking for is very, very low levels of life, we also have to get very far away from any other place that people normally go, because people shed life everywhere. So we have a tiny little hut that we drive out to and spend the night at, and then spend another couple of hours driving to in the morning to get out to our sites. We take our samples, we bundle them all back on top of the Land Rover, and then we come all the way back and spend another night in the tiny little hut in Iceland, which even in the summer isn't that warm.
Oh, really? Okay. Should we see it?
I think we should see it. We have a photo.
Yep. So we got to fit 8 people in there.
What?
And so we basically repeat cycles of this for 3 weeks at a time.
This is a human factors experiment.
The intentional one, yes.
That's crazy. I have to say, I saw that and I thought it might be an outhouse, but in fact it housed 8 people. Right.
It turns out it's very important to select your collaborators by whether or not they snore.
Oh, right. Good thing Kathy didn't have a snorer, I guess, in the Arctic. Wow. All right,
Well, ladies,
fabulous.
it seems that we have again run out of time, and while we would love to spend the rest of our show with you guys, we unfortunately have to thank you, and say
Thank
goodbye.
you for being here.
Happy STEM Day.
Yes, happy STEM Day indeed. Thanks, guys.
So remember, you guys are watching NASA in Silicon Valley Live. Today we're celebrating National STEM Day by talking to some of the amazing Wonder Women of NASA. And if you have any questions for our guests, feel free to write them in the chat. And if you want to learn more about women at NASA, you can go to women.nasa.gov.
Fabulous. All right. So let's go now to our fabulous aeronautics crew. Let's bring out Nettie, Patricia, and Sarah. Come on out. Hello. Welcome. Pull the chair.
We're having way too much fun out here.
We want to come have fun too.
Excellent.
So first things first, can you ladies introduce yourselves? And I know you guys are all aerospace engineers, but what exactly do you do?
Okay, I'll start. My name's Nettie Roosboom. I am an aerospace engineer, and I lead our pressure-sensitive paint technology here at NASA Ames.
Okay.
I'm Patricia Ventura. I'm an aerospace engineer also, and actually I work in the supercomputing division here at NASA Ames.
Supercomputing. Awesome.
My name's Sarah D'Souza, and I design guidance and control systems for spacecraft.
Very cool. All right. Should we find out where you come from? How about your origin stories? How did you know you wanted to do this?
So I will claim that I knew when I was 8 months.
8 months?
8 months.
Months, not years.
I kid. Why I kid is because when I was a freshman in college, or sorry, a sophomore in college, I was able to get a internship at Johnson Space Center and work alongside astronauts who were on the space shuttle. And many years later, my sister was going through our photo album, and she sent me a picture. It was a picture of my mom holding me when I was a baby, and with a picture of the space shuttle in the back in our room.
Wow.
And I just think everything I've done throughout my life has been influenced by my family and what we did as kids. I've
like
always
That's
loved
pretty
space,
cool.
and it's always been something I love.
I guess your parents did too.
Yes.
Let's see it. You brought a copy of the photo.
I did. There it is. It's my mom, and my dad took the picture. And my dad is very much a space enthusiast and a dreamer, and I definitely get that from my dad too.
Nice. Nice story.
That's pretty cool. So what about you, Patricia?
So actually, I remember that my grandmother took me to the planetarium when I was like 4 years old. And then I was so surprised by all the stars you could see. And so I thought at that point that I wanted to do something space related. And then when they always ask kids, what do you want to do when you're like a grown up? Mm-hmm. I was always saying an astronaut. But then when I was in high school, I was very good in math and then in physics. So I decided to go for engineering, and well, I could do space, so aerospace engineering.
Okay.
So yeah.
So we have a photo of a young you. Can we get that brought up on screen?
Yeah. Well, it's not very old photo. That's
Younger you.
yeah. So that photo is 3 years old. It was taken, I think, 1 month after I started my internship here at NASA Ames. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I visited the supercomputer, and I was so surprised. It was so big and loud also.
So does that supercomputer happen to have a name that we may know about?
Yeah, so that one is the Pleiades supercomputer. But here at Ames, we have another supercomputer that is called Electra, and we're actually building a third one.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've heard of those Pleiades and Electra, right? Cool.
So what about you, Nettie? Like, what's your origin story?
Yeah, I grew up in Tennessee. I remember going to see the St. Louis Arch, and I remember driving across the bridge and going to the St. Louis Arch, and I just, looked at both of these things. I was studying drafting in high school, and I was like, wow, these are extremely impressive, and I want to do whatever it is that can produce something like this. So, I went into college, started studying mechanical engineering, and then I found fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, and I thought, wow, you're speaking my love language. Like the world made sense at that moment. And so I just kept wiggling my way. That I had an internship as well here at NASA Ames. I wiggled my way over to the wind tunnel division. I thought, wow, this is really cool. You have these giant compressors and radiators and all the things that you had studied there in your textbooks we hear in life, and huge. So and then I found my way over to pressure sensitive paint, which was just a great melody of like hardware, software, wind tunnels. So I'm really in my happy place.
Okay. So we have a photo of young Nettie.
Yes. Oh dear.
At the arch.
Look at you.
And we know what's going on in your head at that moment.
Yeah, and I didn't know before we went there that you could go up in this little tram and go the whole way across. It's crazy. It was really neat.
Did you get in the tram?
Yeah, I did. I remember my dad mentioning something like, "Oh, I feel must be how a chick feels in an egg." you were crammed in there.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So should we go back to basics for just a moment and do some vocabulary? Right?
Yes.
Because you guys have mentioned computational fluid dynamics and wind tunnels and whatnot, but I know that was new to me when I got to NASA. So can you tell us really quickly, what's a wind tunnel?
Really quickly, with a wind tunnel, you don't know how an aircraft is going to fly in space, so instead of throwing the aircraft through the air, we hold the aircraft still and we blow the wind over the aircraft.
Okay, so you bring the model to the air.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Very cool. All right, and I know you do a lot of work in there, so we're going to talk more about that later.
Yeah.
So, like, what about CFD, or commonly known as computational fluid dynamics?
Yeah, so that's what I do. So it means we simulate the flow of air or anything. It just has to be a fluid around your geometry. And with supercomputers, we get to see the performances, the acoustics, we calculate the pressure distribution, we can improve the designs. And yeah.
All right. Pretty neat. I think we have a comment from Nettie.
Yeah.
Did you see that one? Fluid dynamics made sense to her? That was pretty much the most horrible thing I ever had to deal with, says Zalazar.
But see, I think that's the beauty of engineering, is that there's things that really click with someone and they love and really embrace, and it is their love language. And then there's other things where you're like, why would you even study this? So that's a beautiful reason for having diverse folks looking at the same problem.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so wanted to remind you guys, and also for our viewers at home, that the first A in NASA is aeronautics.
Oh, of course.
And so Ames Research Center is one of the leaders in that research. And for all you fun facts at home, we are the second aeronautics lab
in the country, right?
Behind Langley.
We were there at the very beginning.
Establishment.
An establishment.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
First in many realms.
Awesome.
Okay, so we're gonna move along. So we're gonna do your origin story. So it's like, when did you ladies know that you wanted to be an aerospace engineer?
You want to start
let's start with Nettie.
Yeah. Well, I it was really here at NASA Ames that I was studying mechanical, and so that's where I made the leap over to aerospace engineering. And that's how I found pressure-sensitive paint. Maybe we want to.
And so, piggybacking on that, let's talk about your day in the life.
Yeah. A day in my life, like the other women that came before. We have a very diverse set of days. It depends, if we're planning, if we're trying to execute, or if we're processing data. So we have different customers that I work with that come to the wind tunnel, and they come to me and they say, I want pressure-sensitive paint on my model. And I say, great, what do you expect? What do you want? And then we do this planning. We actually install the model in the wind tunnel, and then I paint the wind tunnel model.
Something similar to this.
Oh, wow. Where'd you get this?
It's just like
yeah. So we'll take large wind tunnel models. This one's a small replica. But one that we have worked on in the past may be about 1.5 feet in diameter that we'll put in the wind tunnel model. I'll paint it with a base coat, and then I'll paint it with a top coat. And with this top coat has a luminescent molecule that responds to oxygen. And why oxygen is interesting is because partial pressure of oxygen is pressure. So this paint will sense how much oxygen is in the air, and so we read that as pressure. Why that's interesting is that traditionally we put pressure taps on the wind tunnel model in a discrete location, so we only know the pressure at that specific location. But now, as you can see with the pink model here, we can sense everywhere there's pressure. So now that we know the pressure of the over the model, we know the area of the model, then we can know the forces that the model is seeing.
Okay. So, I think we have a photo of you.
Oh, yeah.
In your area.
That's me in my domain. Yeah. So that was a recent test. As y'all know, NASA's developing the largest rocket ever built, and we will be going to the moon, onto Mars, and we are sending different rovers and things into deep space. And so this is the crew version of SLS, and it was here testing in our wind tunnels back in December. And we took pressure-sensitive paint measurements on it then. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun to be applying this technology to this next generation of space vehicles and aircraft that NASA is producing.
Super
Okay.
cool. Yeah.
So, what about you, Patricia? Like, what's a day in the life?
So I spend most of my time in front of computers, of course.
Makes sense. Supercomputers. No, but-
Supercomputers. Well, but my computer is a regular computer. I just connect to the supercomputer.
Yeah.
But so my work consists on computational fluid dynamics, as we mentioned before, and so we model the geometry of our aircraft or rotorcraft. We
Like that one?
like that one. of
Danielle's
course.
busy, but let's.
Yeah.
It is
So-
pretty big.
All right. So this is a drone, yeah?
Yeah, this is a drone. So for this case, for example, we obtain the geometry, and then I spend a lot of time meshing that geometry. That means so removing a lot of details that we don't need for the CFD, and then we put points everywhere on the surface. That's where we're going to solve our fluid dynamics equations. And then we need to fill the rest of the space around the vehicle. So we like model a bigger volume around the drone. And after, once I'm confident with my mesh, I run the simulation with the supercomputer. So we use from 1,000 to 2,000 processors, and that's a lot of processors. And it takes a few days to complete.
Wow. That's a
And
complex
then,
calculation.
Well, first I need to be sure I haven't made any mistakes.
Sure.
And then we check the solutions. We see if there are problems with the geometry design, and we might modify the geometry to find better, more performant, quieter, safer vehicles.
Okay. So I just want to review. You were talking about you get the geometry of this flying vehicle, right? So do you scan it somehow to get its shape
Yeah. So
on your computer?
Yeah, so we scan the geometry, but the scan is not 100% precise, so sometimes it's a bit wiggle. So then we need to spend a lot of time smoothing that geometry.
Okay, so you get the perfect shape, the outline of this.
And perfect
aircraft.
and real. Like it has to
Real.
be close to the
Yes,
real model.
as close to reality as you can get it. Okay.
I think we have a photo of
Yeah,
one of those
we do,
scans.
one of those
exactly.
scans.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the surface mesh of this vehicle. And then, so I think it had, so that's the surface, but once I did the volume mesh, so the complete mesh, it has 500 million grid points,
Wow.
which is a lot.
Oh, 500 million. That stops being something I can really.
That's why we need a supercomputer.
Right. And then what is the final result of all that work? What can we see? that
So
comes
we
out
can
supercomputer?
visualize the flow. Then we can calculate the forces on the vehicle. The same thing with the wind tunnels. But because everything is with the supercomputer, then I can just modify the geometry. I don't have to rebuild a different drone.
Okay. I
We
see.
can also visualize the acoustic field. We can see if it's quiet or noisy.
Can we see the visualization you brought?
Yeah.
Let's bring up that simulation.
So
Is that drone flying?
So actually, that's a modification we did of that drone. If you see the front rotors, they're mounted underneath of the arm. So when we first ran the simulation for the original drone, we saw that the wake of the rotors was the four rotors was interacting with the aft rotors and reducing the performances. So we figure we might mount the rotors in the front underneath to avoid these interactions. And actually, this vehicle is 60% more efficient than the original one.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
for all the
significant.
colors, we could see there was a pressure, and the spaghetti things, that's the vortex wake.
All right.
Pretty cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Supercomputing is super cool. I say that. That is awesome. All right. How about we get Sarah's day in the life,
yeah,
and then
so
we'll
Sarah,
get
what's-
to some other objects they brought to share.
All right, I will say my day in the life is being able to work with wonderful people like Nettie and Patricia here, because we take the data that they create and tell us about how the vehicle performs and use that in our simulations to tell us, can we really fly these vehicles within the requirements and the environments that we want to fly them in. So for example, with an aircraft, with their simulations and the wind tunnel results, we can validate that we have good predictions of what our aerodynamics are for a particular aircraft, and then verify that it can actually get from point A to point B. So for example, one of the X-planes that NASA has going right now, which is an experimental aircraft, X-59, they use this information to be able to model in the national airspace how these vehicles will perform. And we can actually understand, can they integrate well? Can a pilot actually maneuver this vehicle with the performance that results from the geometry? So my day in the life is I get to build simulations, integrate them together, and much like them, I didn't go into it as a specific field, but I love fluids. Like, I really do. Like, that visualization was amazing. I love it. So it's just being able to work with other engineers and then apply my own expertise. I end up in a lab or in front of a computer or at another center trying to figure out how we can bring all the tools that NASA has and leverage them together.
Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's a great example of like NASA Aeronautics, that it's you don't build a house with just wind tooling, so we don't build an airplane with just wind tool. We do wind tunnel testing, we do CFD, we do simulations, and over a course of several years, we come and we develop an aircraft that is produced and people will fly one day and we'll ride around supersonically.
Awesome. So we have a video of a project you've worked on, right? It's a heat shield. Could
so
you tell us?
another part of this is we can't exactly use wind tunnels yet. I mean, not yet. I should say it's more like arc jets, where you can test whether or not the entry vehicle can take the temperatures you have. But we currently don't have a way to like test a spacecraft in a relevant environment of high speed and high heat, and have it kind of move the way it does when you fly an aircraft in air on Earth, right?
Yeah.
So we have to do a number of different things, which is build simulations with CFD, so we get most of our aerodynamic predictions, forces and moments from CFD, from Patricia, and then apply those to our simulations. And the video you're going to see is a technology here at Ames called ADAPT, which is the adaptable, deployable, and entry placement technology. It tells you everything you need to know about it, almost everything. So we'll show you footage of that, and it kind of gives you a sense of what the operations are expected for that kind of vehicle.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so let's go ahead and let's take a look.
What's happening here?
Oh, so it's deploying the command module and what I'll call the entry vehicle, and now the entry vehicle, or ADEPT, is deploying, and it'll separate from this service module and prepare its attitude to enter the atmosphere of a planet. So here it's Mars, and you see because of its high speed at entry, it has a high heat pulse that it goes through. And it's very important that that entry technology protects whatever payload it's landing via that thermal protection system that is facing the Earth as it enters.
Okay. And you're working on the part behind?
I'm working on the stuff behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
It helps guide it in the right way.
Yes.
Cool. Excellent.
Pretty cool. So we are going to move into our next segment. It's called Show and Tell. It's where, as the name suggests, we asked our guests to bring in something fun and unique to show us from the lab and tell us about it.
Yeah.
Just bring it out again.
All right, so Nettie gave us a preview of this special stuff from her lab, but I still have questions about it.
Yes. Are you paying attention?
All right. Okay, so you have a model in the wind tunnel.
Yes.
And in the past, you used to have sensors installed to capture the pressure, the air pressure readings, right? But this is a newer, better, bigger, better way of doing it.
And kind of along the same lines as earlier, is like, when we come to a wind tunnel test, there's different tools that we can use to measure flow, measure pressure, measure force in a wind tunnel test. So traditionally it was pressure taps, and we still do a lot of testing with pressure taps. So often when we're going to test either an aircraft or a spacecraft, we talk about, like, is pressure sensitive paint realistic to use? And sometimes it's, no, we just need pressure taps. We don't need to spend the time and money to do the whole pressure sensitive paint. Other times, we need to know more about what's happening on the surface of the vehicle, and measuring the surface pressure is very insightful. So different vehicles, we've done all 3 of the commercial crew vehicles. We've done Space Launch System. We've done several of the X-planes using the pressure-sensitive paint. So it's a new technology. It uses optics. So we have the paint, which is interesting because there's the whole chemistry of the paint, the application science of the paint, and then the data acquisition. So we use UV lights to excite this paint. It responds to oxygen, as I mentioned earlier. And so the oxygen is going to come in and quench these molecules. So the luminescent molecules, they're shining really bright, as we saw in the picture earlier, is this fluorescent pink light. The oxygen molecules come in and make it shine really dim. So oxygen means there's higher pressures present.
Okay.
If there's an absence of oxygen, so a lower pressure, then it's not starving the luminescent molecules of energy, so it's shining really bright.
Yeah, okay.
So we use 8 to 12 cameras mounted around the wind tunnel, and we will record the intensity that is being emitted by the paint.
Right. So you can know the pressure at every point on that object,
and I think,
right? At every moment.
In a previous episode of NASA in Silicon Valley Live, a few of my colleagues came on and we're talking about sensing the PSP, and we equate, we use cameras that have 1 million pixels on them. And for some of these, we use up to 8 or 12. So you can imagine we have 12 million pixels looking at this vehicle. So that's essentially 12 million instruments that we're using to sense pressure. On traditional models, maybe there's 200 or 300 pressure taps. If there's a lot, sometimes we'll do it even with just 12 pressure taps. But yeah, using the knowledge of and the technology behind high-speed cameras, high-intensity lighting that we use to excite this paint, and the technology that's come along with the paint, it's really made this possible.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and fun fact for y'all, I want to give a shout out to you. The director of NASA Glenn, Janet Kavandi, she had her start in PSP, or she did her PhD in PSP chemistry, and did some of the very early wind tunnel tests involving using PSP here at NASA Ames. So.
Very cool.
Hi, Janet.
Another Wonder Woman of NASA.
I actually have a question. So you have 2 bottles.
Yes.
What are the 2 different things?
This is the base coat, and this is the top coat. So we need both of these for the paint to work. Often with painting this, this is where all my stress lies. Is that I take a lot of pride in the paint job, and that's one reason why I also love PSP. Is there's this artistic, learned art behind it that you don't just slap it on. I wanted to do also that the paint responds well. Yeah.
Cool.
What a cool job!
So, about how long does it take for you to paint and to prepare these models using your pressure-sensitive paint?
For some of the larger models, like we saw in the photo,
let's go ahead and get that brought back up on screen.
Since we do several different layers, and then we actually have to cure it, so I will bake the solvent out of the paint. That took about 8 hours to paint. So this paint is toxic, so we wear respirators. So I would say that's one of the more like the two physical parts of the job are crawling around this wind tunnel and mounting all the cameras and lamps, which is a lot of fun. You get to use your hands and use mechanical skills and think of ways to design lamp mounts, camera mounts to make things better. But yeah, and then the painting, wearing that hood for 8 hours and then finally coming out and taking a breath of fresh air. So
Wow. Amazing. You do a lot of different things in your job. Very cool. All right. Well, I think we should keep going.
Yeah.
Can someone grab Patricia's object?
Yeah.
Parts of this look kind of familiar to me, but I don't actually know what they amount to.
So that's it. Yeah. So this is a supercomputer node. It's
Cool.
one of the 1,800 Sandy Bridge nodes we have in the Pleiades supercomputer.
1,800 of these?
1,800.
Wow.
And then, so each of these has 16 processors, so you just need to multiply.
Wow.
And the thing is, we don't only have Sandy Bridge nodes, we have a bunch of EB Bridge nodes, Broadwell nodes, Haswell nodes, Skylake nodes we just got. So
I don't know what any of those things are, but there are a lot of them, right?
yeah, yeah. So basically, air comes from here, and then it cools down the two processor, like the nodes. So there is a double, and then it comes out here, and then there is like a water system
Oh, okay.
to cool down the air.
Yeah. Because there's so much computing happening, right?
Yeah, too much. Yeah,
hot.
it generates a lot of heat, so
Wow.
you need to cool it down.
Super cool. How
cool.
does this compare to my computer? Like, do you know any facts about how much more powerful this might be?
I don't know. It might be 10 times better
okay.
than your computer.
Yeah. Okay. And then do that math for all 16 processors, 1,800 of them.
Yeah, and it's only
Amazing.
the Sandy Bridge nodes. Yeah.
Right. And then all those other guys, right?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. We have so many computers. Like it's a big computer.
Yeah.
And
I would add, if we didn't have this, right? I mean, the length of time it would take you
yeah,
to calculate.
I can
I mean,
it's
we
not
can-
even possible.
it's not exactly. It's,
even
like it would take you
possible.
years to do
Yeah.
like the simulation that you
So yeah, it will take me years. Yeah, I mean, imagine if I
did.
made
You like
a
hit
mistake.
start, and then it was like, I know you wouldn't know until like 20 years later.
Yeah, I think it's like a really cool example for National STEM Day that, like, maybe computational fluid dynamics isn't your thing, but maybe other areas of fluids and heat transfer, like, the design of these, and
Yep.
when you look at the picture from Patricia and seeing all those different nodes and like heating and cooling, well, not heating, but cooling is a big issue. Yeah, and keeping it at a certain temperature.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, like with the supercomputer, it's like not just used by the CFD group, like people like Sarah and I hop on there and like, you try out things on your laptop in your office, but man, I really need to make this work faster. So hop on the supercomputer. It's a great resource that we have here at NASA Ames to be able to use.
Yeah, cool
And even
story.
NASA.
Yeah, cool story is that the new supercomputer, the Electra supercomputer, was designed using the supercomputer.
It's almost like trying to answer the question, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, they simulated the airflow to cool down the new supercomputer.
That's great.
Yeah.
Fun fact. Well, thank you. All right. Should we?
Okay,
get
yeah, we can
Sarah's?
go. We can. I might ask Patricia to maybe move the note over.
Because this is a big one coming in.
So, watch your head, Abby.
Oh wow.
So,
It's a big candy bowl.
what I brought today.
Candy bowl.
This would be great at like different outlet stores.
I can see some dip going in there.
Yeah.
I think this has a little bit more important use, but no. So this is kind of a partially stowed adaptive vehicle.
Okay.
So it's 1 meter. When fully stowed, it comes out to 1 meter in diameter. I'm showing you the backside of the adaptive aeroshell. If you reference the video from the beginning,
that's what we saw in the
you
video,
saw
right?
the nose and the forward-facing side of the vehicle going through the atmosphere. And this material here is a 3D woven fabric that is essentially the thermal protection system.
Wow.
That enables a technology where we're able to stow the vehicle on launch and create a technology that allows us to land larger payloads on Mars and allow us to stow that payload. Sorry.
We're getting a sign that
It allows us to stow this payload in existing rockets, so we don't have to build new rockets to launch this kind of vehicle, because we can grow the mass without growing the vehicle itself as big as the payloads that we want to land on Mars.
Because
that's
this has to be
actually
big
pretty cool.
enough to cover a larger spacecraft.
Exactly. So, so why I'm showing you the backside of this is to show you, one, that it is not like your Apollo capsule, right, where it's covered on the back. And that poses a really big design challenge for us, which is how do we put the kind of control systems that Apollo used and placed on that back shell on something like this, where it's non-existent. So what we're trying to do is do what the Wright brothers did for aircraft. Try to maneuver this vehicle to where we want it to go and design the systems on this existing structure, this rib structure, or on the payload in order to land, let's say, a human habitat where we want it to go. We don't want it to just kind of float along and then we're like, okay, we guess we got to go over there. Guess we'll set up here. That's right.
That was an interesting origin story.
So what we want to do is use these existing structures that allow the vehicle to be stowed to install new kinds of control systems to guide these vehicles.
Very cool.
That's pretty cool.
Neat. It's fun to see the backside of it. We learned
always
about
see
it on the
this
last
side,
episode.
yeah.
Far side of the adept.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for bringing all that stuff in.
We're going to move on to our question and answering session, but Sarah, don't go too far, because one of our watchers wants to know, can it cover a Curiosity type payload?
So, yes, it can, but there's still design challenges. I would say this technology has the capability to grow in scale, to land large payloads, but because it's a cutting-edge technology, there's still a lot of development work to overcome some challenges that we may have. And all of those challenges come with how do you package and stow everything that you need with respect to the control system to land it where you need to go.
Okay.
But it's possible.
Pretty cool.
All right. Neat. For Nettie, we have a comment. That's so cool. Now, I don't know at what point that comment came in, but
It's all cool.
yeah, exactly. You told us about a lot of cool stuff.
All of NASA is cool.
And a question, what is the operating temperature of the paint?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I would say a nice bookend would be from down to like 40 degrees F up to maybe 140 degrees F. When we start going up to higher temperatures, the paint will actually start to peel off the model. So then we need to think about what kind of paint we use, how do we apply it. So there's interesting design challenges with the chemistry of the paint and actually the application of the paint.
Yeah, neat.
And Patricia, we have a question for you. So someone wants to know, is NASA currently running any quantum computers for calculations yet, or are they not really worthwhile yet?
So actually, yes, there is a quantum computer in the supercomputing division, but they run. So it's a semi-quantum computer. It's not quite there yet, but they're still working on it, and they run some simulations on predicting the trees, like just from images, what is a tree and what is not a tree. I think there is. You can find it on the website.
Okay.
But yeah.
Very
Still
cool.
working on it.
There's a question, if anybody has an answer. Has Ames ever done aerodynamics tests for a Martian atmosphere?
Yeah, we have a Martian wind tunnel here. So
cool is
the
that?
short answer is yes.
We have a whole wind tunnel for it.
But
Cool.
have they tested any vehicles in there?
Yes,
They have, okay.
tested the Mars copter.
Oh, okay.
The Mars
Nice.
helicopter.
Okay.
That's another cool thing. We'll talk about that someday. Mars
We actually do
helicopter.
have Mars here on Earth.
We do.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about Mars here on Earth today, and for the biology and the environments. Let's find another one.
Oh, one cool question. It's, let's see, what are the most exciting technological developments on the horizon for your field?
Ooh, yeah, I'll hop in there and let me tell you all about pressure-sensitive paint. So what we have been doing for the past, since the 1980s is this is really a steady state measurement. And what I would claim that we're leading here is looking at unsteady pressure-sensitive paint. So it can, instead of sensing a pressure over several seconds, what if we could sense it like 25,000 times a second? Ooh. And that's what we're working on now. It's been proven in the labs and in small wind tunnels, but I love a good challenge, and I like to call it, I'm a child of the Tim the Toolman Taylor, more power. So I like we mentioned earlier, dream big. I love to dream big. So that model that we showed earlier was actually using the unsteady pressure sensitive paint, sensing at 10,000 frames per second, 25,000 frames per second. And why that's interesting is that for CFD, for wind tunnels, when we start talking about unsteady aerodynamics, there's a big question mark there, and that's probably one of the biggest feats that we're facing as NASA, and even just like the aerospace community in general, is unsteady aero is hard to predict. And one way that we design vehicles is we just make them heavier and stronger, and that will dampen out any of these unsteady aero flow physics that are happening. But where unsteady PSP, why do I even care about that, is that if we can actually measure this better, and we don't just throw mass at the problem and make the tail of the aircraft stronger, make the heat shield around the astronauts thicker, but if we could actually sense it and measure it and be more accurate in our calculations of the loads, it's really crazy to think of the possibilities. We could put more payload on. We can make the rocket lighter.
Not only that, the control systems, which take all of this input, it makes my job easier, because then all I have to do is worry about getting to the location, as opposed to now accounting for all these dispersions we didn't know, we couldn't predict, or I had to be really robust to a large uncertainty, which puts a lot of pressure on the control systems.
Yeah, it's fun to think, just imagine and dream for a moment, because I bet we're not that far away, but you have to have that vision, you have to have that dream, and I think that's really what resonates with anyone here at NASA, is dream outside the box.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Pretty cool. Cool. What about you two?
What about you guys?
So for me, I'm gonna mention two things. Okay, so the first is that where CFD can be useful for not just predicting the flow or just the forces. So Diana, she was here before. She said she's working with drones and UAVs measuring fog. So actually, that's one of the projects I'm working on right now. We're using CFD to predict the ground effect of their drone when they're taking off.
Oh, really?
So in order to avoid the contamination of the sample, they want to know where to put it before taking off and landing. So we're running simulations to see that. And it might change their design, or it might make it more confident.
Oh, right, yeah.
So,
pretty cool. Change how they do their science based on what you find. Yeah, neat.
And then the other thing is it's called urban air mobility. So it means drones, but for people. So
That's right. So it's like everyday users, like the rest of us ladies here that don't get to work with drones every day at work.
Yeah, so it means in the city, instead of taking your car or the bus or whatever, you could jump on one of these drones and take it to the office.
Wow.
And so, there are many challenges on that, but the idea is to have electric vehicles with multi-rotors also, because we want to be able to take off and land vertically. So we don't need a long highway.
Yeah.
And runway, sorry. And then, but we also, there are challenges, so these vehicles need to be safe in order to be able to fly in the cities, right? And then we also need to make them quiet, and then also they need to be efficient, because right now a drone can only fly for 10, 20 minutes, and and it's a small thing. So
okay.
You want to go bigger, and then you want to carry people, and they will have to be safe. So we're doing CFD simulations of these vehicles.
That's pretty cool. So all those challenges for urban air mobility you can work on in supercomputing, and then you'll pass those on to the aerospace.
That's right.
Folks.
That's right.
We're gonna make that a reality so we can fly to work.
That's right.
Very cool. Awesome. Those are good
What about
examples.
you, Sarah? What's your dream big for your area of expertise?
My dream big is that we are a deep space faring people. I mean, that really is kind of where we want to go next. NASA's been a pioneer on low Earth orbit. We've been a pioneer to the moon. We want to go back to the moon, right? Start looking at technologies that we would need to actually go to planets farther out, Mars specifically. But we've got to have a testing ground. We've got to understand what it means to do these things, but still be able to come back to Earth and retool, and so a lot of technologies have to be enabled for us to go farther, right? One such, and shameless plug, right? Like Nettie, is entry, descent, and landing technologies like this one, Adept. We want to go larger than robotic missions. We want to go larger than small science missions, those kinds of things. And we want to land habitats and people. And to me, if we can find that, and it's hard work. There's no simple answer. That's why no one's done it yet. No one's completed it, right? Because we're all trying to figure out what is the efficient way, what is the safest way, how do we do this successfully? And I think what's really great is NASA and the United States is involved in this problem. I mean, it's
Something to be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is that's my technologies on the forefront are really about how do we go to deep space? I mean, it really is
Exciting.
That's
cool.
That is really cool.
I was just thinking, what about the question we wanted to ask? Do you guys have a favorite spacecraft or aircraft? Could you choose? Is that a terrible choice to force you to make?
It is a terrible choice for me to have to make because I like aircraft and spacecraft. So the X-59 low boom flight demonstrator is one of my favorite aircraft right now, just because it is exactly what NASA does the work to create the next industry in our country, which is really amazing.
Yeah. And the plan is to create a supersonic plane?
To create a supersonic plane that reduces the noise of the boom. And
Can fly over land.
And can fly over land.
And is open to civilians, so
Exactly.
it's not just open
Jet
to
setters.
military. Yeah,
Or the military. Or jet
If
setters.
we want to get to Hawaii in 30 minutes, we can get to Hawaii in 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get going. Yeah. And then I love spacecraft. And right now my favorite is deployable entry vehicle.
Fair enough.
So for me, I guess I have to say these urban air mobility vehicles I've been working on. So I don't think we have a picture for it, but it's called a side-by-side aircraft. So it's a concept. It's looks like a helicopter, but instead of one main rotor, it has two rotors, and these two rotors overlap. But they're synchronized, so the blades don't crash against each other. And this overlapping, we're still working on it, but it looks like improves the efficiency by 20% in cruise flight.
Oh,
okay.
So
yeah.
How cool! That's
really cool.
Yeah.
practical.
Well,
bonding. That's cool.
Yeah, there might be a video soon. So
Keep
an eye.
Okay, what about you, Nettie?
Yeah,
What's your favorite?
I'm like Sarah. We all love fluids, so anything that flies through the air, we're just in love with. So
That might be worth saying. Actually, air is a fluid for you guys, right?
And we should have set that up in the beginning. That as fluid dynamicists, aerospace engineers, we consider anything that's a gas or a liquid, anything that's deformable. So I always like to move my hands through the air. So. But my favorites happen to be the ones I've worked on. And the really exciting piece of that is in my career so far, I've gotten to work on the Orion space vehicle. We've applied the PSP there. The SLS at Truss Brace Wing is one of the experimental aircraft that we are testing and collecting a lot of data on, assessing. And I think the really interesting part, I remember when we did EM1 of the Orion spacecraft, and I woke up early because, it was launching at Kennedy, so it was like 3 o'clock in the morning here, and I woke up early, and, I'd been here maybe 4 years at that point, so you're just like shy and excited, but, it was like magical in my heart because, my fingerprint was on that. And it's really cool. And like each one of us here have our fingerprints on something like that. And I think it's a wonderful example about NASA that it's like not any one of us creates an SLS or an Adept or a drone, but it's like this community of experts across many fields, including the two of y'all, that like it's important to get the PR out there and do shows like this to show like this is what NASA's doing. So like we have our fingerprints on that,
It's
and
nice because we all have a little piece of the story.
yeah, and it's all about telling our story. Yeah,
That's exciting. So we have some questions about your careers, but a quick technical question for Sarah. How is it going to reduce the supersonic boom? So that would be the X-59 experimental plane.
So the way it reduces the boom is by virtue of its geometry. So you can design the vehicle's geometry to create a pressure wave that does not have as much of a loud boom when it reaches, when it creates that shock wave.
All right, the geometry of the plane. Cool.
Interesting.
yeah, and if we can think of it was like that pressure wave that we hear as the sonic boom, like that's energy coming from the airplane and hitting our ear. So if we can distribute that energy over like a longer nose, which you'll look at you can look at pictures of the X-59 and see how long the nose is, then we're decreasing the energy that's coming to us to our ears. So
spreading it out.
Yeah, so that's why it's called the low boom demonstrator.
It's not a no boom.
Yeah, there's still a boom. We have not changed physics, though we have tried.
Very cool.
Okay, well, I do have a comment from the chat. They said these women are such an inspiration.
You are. You really are.
That's my mom.
Thanks, Daddy's mom.
Hey, and I think one interesting thing, like looking at the Adept model here, like since it's National STEM Day, and I'm sure there's people out there thinking about like, oh, like I want to be an engineer, but I don't know what. I think like everything that we've talked about today has been like a great example. So it's like if you like material science, like I see this woven fabric here, and I saw the chemistry of the paint. And the supercomputing node, like heat transfer. We look at the structure here. If you like structures, if you're more of a mechanical person, the whole electrical computer science field. So there's a great story about just our sharing, and then also the women that have come before us to share. Just like this plethora of ideas, and like we all have a different background and found our love language and in different areas. So I think that's a beautiful story about NASA, that like there's really a flavor of every engineer here.
Right.
Okay, so specifically, like if we have, some of our users at home or viewers at home, like what piece of advice would you give to a young student who's trying to figure out what they want to do or what they want to be?
Good question.
Yeah. I will say one thing: communicate. It's so important to communicate. Like as we've talked, like passing data back and forth, talking to one another. That's so important. So that's often a kind of a fluffy answer, but communicate. I also would say start and don't stop. Like I look at different times, like in my academic career and my professional career, where there's just this daunting task. That's like I've never heard of pressure-sensitive paint, but now I claim I'm one of the world's experts in that. And so you just stay start and don't stop. Just keep going at it.
Just keep plugging away, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
well, what about you, Patricia?
I would say passion with excellence. So whatever you choose to do it with passion, and the excellence will come with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would, my piece of advice is never let any self-doubt or anything external to you prevent you from staying the course. And so stay the course, because I know for myself, math and science actually didn't come easy to me. I struggled with it, but when I actually learned it, it was the most amazing experience. Every time I sat down to a math problem, even though I knew I was going to study longer or it was going to be harder, at the end, I was just like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. This is so cool, and now it's teaching me something. And so no matter what challenges I encountered throughout my life, it was really important to never let those kinds of things prevent me from staying the course. And that's what I would tell youngsters.
That's such a great piece of advice.
I think that's really inspirational to hear where it didn't come easily to people. Like, you don't have to be a superstar in math to end up working at NASA. You just got to work hard at it. Yeah. That's super cool.
Or ask your sister. She was 1 year. We're 1 year apart, and she's always better in math than me. So I would ask her questions too. Well, she helped me sometimes.
That's a communication.
Yeah. And you know what? I think something that's really beautiful here with having all the women that we've had on the show is, we were talking about running when y'all showed Sunita Williams earlier, and she famously ran the Boston Marathon in space. But there's another marathon runner, Shalane Flanagan, and she won the New York City Marathon last year. And she had this great article talking about her bringing other women into this running club, and she said it's not so lonely at the top if you bring others along.
Oh,
and
right.
and that passion, talking to one another, making room for more women in science, technology, engineering, and math. Like we have a responsibility to pull each other in and say, look what she's doing. Wow, she's amazing. Yeah.
Right.
You get a chance to highlight other Wonder Woman in your life.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Okay, well, I think
wrap
we
it
have
up?
officially run out of time.
Yeah.
Darn it.
So thank you for joining us, and also thank you at home for joining us. You can learn more about women at NASA by going to women.nasa.gov. And this has been NASA in Silicon Valley Live, a conversational show out of NASA's Ames Research Center with the various scientists, researchers, and engineers, and all around cool folks here at NASA, where we get to talk about all the nerdy NASA news that you need to know about. And if you like that, you can find us on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, and NASA TV. And if you can't catch us live, that is no big deal. We will have the video on demand after the show is over, and you can also catch the audio version of this podcast through services throughout the solar system and beyond. And a huge thank you to our guests and everyone that joined us on the Twitch chat. We'll be back next week on Thursday, November 15th, where we'll talk about heat shields and how they help spacecraft survive atmospheric entry. Until next then, thank you for watching.
Bye.